The following outline is provided as an overview of a topical guide to ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt was an ancient civilization of eastern North Africa, concentrated along the lower reaches of the Nile River in what is now the modern country of Egypt. Egyptian civilization coalesced around 3150 BCE with the political unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under the first pharaoh. The many achievements of the ancient Egyptians include the quarrying, surveying and construction techniques that facilitated the building of monumental pyramids, temples, and obelisks, a system of mathematics, a practical and effective system of medicine, irrigation systems and agricultural production techniques, the first known ships, Egyptian faience and glass technology, new forms of literature, and the earliest known peace treaty. What type of thing is ancient Egypt? Ancient Egypt can be described as an ancient civilization, a Bronze Age civilization. Part of ancient history. Geography of ancient Egypt. Places see also. Architecture of ancient Egypt: Abu Ghorab, Abu Mena, Abu Rawash, Abu Simbel, Abydos, Alexandria, Al-Fame, Atef Pehu, Amarna, Akhetaten, Aswan, Isayat, Avaris, Beni Hassan, Bubastis, Burin, Bizris, Buto, Dashur, Deir el-Bara, Deir el-Medina, Edfu, El-Lahun, Elephantine, Abu Yebu, Gebel el-Silsila, Gertza, Giza, Gaza, Heliopolis, Anu, Iunu, Luxor, Memphis, Zanibhedj, Rosetta, Saqqara, Tanis, Janet, Thebes, Niwt, Waset, Thinis. More. Government and politics of ancient Egypt. Pharaohs. Pharaoh. An article about the history of the title Pharaoh, with descriptions of the regalia, crowns and titles used. List of pharaohs. This article contains a list of the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, from the early dynastic period before 3000 BCE through to the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Ancient Egyptian royal titulary. Government officials. Vizier. The vizier was the highest official in ancient Egypt to serve the king, or pharaoh, during the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. Viceroy of Kush. The Lower Nubian Kush was a province of Egypt from the 16th century BCE to 11th century BCE. During this period it was ruled by a viceroy who reported directly to the Egyptian pharaoh. Treasurer. The treasurer was responsible for products coming to the royal palace. They were the main economical administrator of the royal belongings. Egyptian law. Egyptian law. Military of ancient Egypt. Military of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian warfare. Chariotry in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian navy. General history of ancient Egypt. History of ancient Egypt. History of ancient Egypt. By period: prehistoric Egypt. The prehistory of Egypt spans the period of earliest human settlement to the beginning of the early dynastic period of Egypt in California, 3100 BCE. Naqada I, or Amratian culture, a cultural period in the history of pre-dynastic Upper Egypt, which lasted approximately from 4000 to 3500 BCE. Naqada II, or Gertza culture, the Gerzian is the second of three phases of the Naqada culture, and so is called Naqada II. It begins circa 3500 BCE lasting through circa 3200 BCE. Naqada III, or Samenan culture. Naqada III is the last phase of the Naqadan period of ancient Egyptian prehistory, dating approximately from 3200 to 3100 BCE. Early dynastic period of Egypt. The Archaic or Early Dynastic period of Egypt immediately follows the unification of Lower and Upper Egypt c. 3100 BCE. It is generally taken to include the First Dynasty of Egypt, the Second Dynasty of Egypt, Old Kingdom, the name given to the period in the 3rd millennium BCE when Egypt attained its first continuous peak of civilization and complexity and achievement, the first of three so-called kingdom periods, which mark the high points of civilization in the Lower Nile Valley. This time period includes the 3rd dynasty of Egypt, the 4th dynasty of Egypt, the 5th dynasty of Egypt, the 6th dynasty of Egypt. First intermediate period of Egypt. This period is often described as a dark period in ancient Egyptian history, spanning approximately 140 years after the end of the Old Kingdom from California, 2181–2055 BCE. It included the 7th and 8th dynasties of Egypt, the 9th dynasty of Egypt, the 10th dynasty of Egypt, part of the 11th dynasty of Egypt, Middle Kingdom of Egypt, the period in the history of ancient Egypt between 2055 BC and 1650 BC. This period includes later part of the 11th dynasty of Egypt, the 12th dynasty of Egypt, the 13th dynasty of Egypt, the 14th dynasty of Egypt. Some writers include the 13th and 14th dynasties in the Second Intermediate Period. Second Intermediate Period of Egypt, a period when ancient Egypt fell into disarray for a second time, between the end of the Middle Kingdom and the start of the New Kingdom. It is best known as the period when the Hyksos made their appearance in Egypt and whose reign comprised the 15th dynasty of Egypt, the 16th dynasty of Egypt. New Kingdom of Egypt, also referred to as the Egyptian Empire, is the period in ancient Egyptian history between the 16th century BCE and the 11th century BCE, covering the 18th dynasty of Egypt, the 19th dynasty of Egypt, the 20th dynasty of Egypt. Third Intermediate Period, the time in ancient Egypt from the death of Pharaoh Ramesses XI in 1070 BCE to the foundation of the 26th dynasty by Psamtik I in 664 BCE. This period includes the 21st dynasty of Egypt, the 22nd dynasty of Egypt, the 23rd dynasty of Egypt, the 24th dynasty of Egypt, the 25th dynasty of Egypt. Late period of ancient Egypt, the 26th dynasty of Egypt, also known as the Site period, lasted from 672 BCE to 0525 BCE. The 27th dynasty of Egypt, the First Persian period. This period saw Egypt conquered by an expansive Persian empire under Cambyses. The 28th dynasty of Egypt consisted of a single king, Amyrtaeus, prince of Sais, who rebelled against the Persians. This dynasty lasted 6 years, from 404 BC to 398 BC. The 29th dynasty of Egypt ruled from Mendes, for the period from 398 BC to 380 BC. The 30th dynasty consisted of a series of 3 pharaohs ruling from 380 BC until their final defeat in 343 BC led to the reoccupation by the Persians. Greco-Roman period. Arab conquest. History of ancient Egypt. By region. History of Alexandria. History of ancient Egypt. By subject. Military history of ancient Egypt. Battle of Kadesh. Egyptology. Egyptology, study of ancient Egyptian history, language, literature, religion, architecture and art from the 5th millennium BC until the end of its native religious practices in the 4th century AD. A practitioner of the discipline is an Egyptologist. Egyptologist. A practitioner of Egyptology. Margaret Benson, Alan Gardner, Zahi Hawass, Salima Ikram, William Matthew Flinders Petrie, Alan Gardner, Auguste Mariette, E.A. Wallace Budge, Edouard Neville, Edward R. Ayrton, Bob Breyer, Edwin Smith, Flinders Petrie. Museums with ancient Egyptian exhibits. Egypt, Cairo Museum of Egyptian Antiquities, Luxor Museum, Luxor Mummification Museum, France Louvre, Germany Egyptian Museum of Berlin, Italy Museo Egizio, Turin, Palermo Archaeological Museum, United Kingdom British Museum, Petrie Museum of Egyptology, Ashmolean Museum, United States of America Metropolitan Museum of Art, Brooklyn Museum, Culture of Ancient Egypt, Art of Ancient Egypt, Amarna Art, Dance in Ancient Egypt, Calendar, Cats in Ancient Egypt, Cuisine of Ancient Egypt, Ghosts in ancient Egyptian culture. Homosexuality in ancient Egypt. Pectoral. Symbols of ancient Egypt. Hank djed wajet was scepter uraeus skent hejet deshret atef reserve head. Technology of ancient Egypt. Chariotry in ancient Egypt. Obelisk building technology in ancient Egypt. Stone quarries of ancient Egypt. Urban planning in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian technology. Ancient Egyptian medicine. Ancient Egyptian units of measurement. Egyptian mathematics. Ancient Egyptian multiplication. Architecture of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian architecture. Block statue. False door. Step pyramid. Buildings and structures. Abba symbol. Ben. Deir el-Bara. Colossi of Memnon. Egyptian pyramids. Bent pyramid. Black pyramid. Giza pyramid complex. Great pyramid of Giza. Sphinx. Karnak temple. Lighthouse of Alexandria. Library of Alexandria. Luxor temple. Mastaba. Ramesseum. Serdib. Religion in ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian religion. Death. Ancient Egyptian burial customs. Canopic jars. Mummy. Ancient Egyptian funerary texts. Book of Caverns. Book of Gates. Book of the Dead. Book of the Earth. Book of the Netherworld. Books of Breathing. Mortuary temple. Ancient Egyptian offering formula. Ancient Egyptian retainer sacrifices. Egyptian mythology. Ancient Egyptian creation myths. Egyptian pantheon. Ennead. Atum. Shut. Tefnut. Gebnut. Osiris. Isis. Set. Nephthys. Adode of Hermopolis. Amon, Amunet, Huan, Hauhet, Kuk and Kauket, Nun and Nornet. Other major deities. Amun, Anubis, Apep, Apis, Aten, Bast, Hathor, Horus, Caprichons, Maat, Min. Nith Ptah Ra Sekhmet Sobek Thoth Wetwa Wet deified concepts Chons Happy Maat Minrin Natet Shai Husaya Wall deities Anher Bas Mahes Parkit Sekhmet. Other deities Bees Shnum Sekaseshat Tamarat Montu Nephthys Bastat Amat Bees. Religious concepts Barkar Akh Duatatanism. Egyptian soul. Ennead. Ancient Egyptian language. Ancient Egyptian language. Stages of ancient Egyptian language. Archaic Egyptian, before 2600 BC. The language of the early dynastic period. Egyptian writing in the form of labels and signs has been dated to 3200 BC. Old Egyptian 2686 BC to 2181 BC. The language of the Old Kingdom. Middle Egyptian 2055 BC to 1650 BC, characterized the Middle Kingdom, but endured through the early 18th dynasty until the Amarna period, and continued on as a literary language into the 4th century AD. Late Egyptian 1069 BC to 700 BC, characterized the third intermediate period, but started earlier with the Amarna period. Demotic 7th century BC 5th century AD, from the late period through Roman times. Coptic 1st century AD 17th century AD, from early Roman times to early modern times. Egyptian writing. Hieroglyphs. Hieratic. Demotic. Ancient Egyptian literature. Transliteration of ancient Egyptian writing in ancient Egypt. Egyptian economy. Foreign contacts of ancient Egypt. Palace economy. Scholars. Egyptologists Margaret Benson, Alan Gardner, Zahi Hawa, Salima Ikram, William Matthew Flinders Petrie, Alan Gardner, August Marietti, A. Wallace Budge, Edwin Neville, Edward R. Ayrton, Bob Breyer, Edwin Smith, Flinders Petrie. Publications about ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. A practical guide. Hieroglyphics. The writings of ancient Egypt. The hieroglyphs of ancient Egypt. Oxford Encyclopedia of Ancient Egypt. Reading Egyptian art. A hieroglyphic guide to ancient Egyptian painting and sculpture.